Well, I think, of course, there are plenty of thoughts that one can provide with respect to the overall outcome of this particular United Nations Climate Change Conference here in Baku. Remember that we came into this conference with the overall intention of raising the finance targets, really making that ambitious. And that's because, of course, the world demands that. If you look at where we are right now with respect to the needs, which is somewhere around 4 to 5 trillion US dollars, but of course, what was expected here in Baku was somewhere around 1.3 trillion US dollars. And the fact that only 200 or 300 billion US dollars is being sort of, floated as the amount that's going to feature into the final outcome is something that is really perhaps, based on who you're talking to, a little bit of a disappointing outcome. If you've talked to most of the NGOs, what they're going to tell you is that, this is a slap in the face. This is unacceptable. The African group of negotiators said that. So that tells you exactly that there's a lot of disappointment. Actually, most of the civil society organizations have said, walk out of the talks. Don't even take it because a bad deal, better not even have a deal than to have a bad deal. So that's point number one as far as the finance outcome was expected. So that's point number one. Number two, if you look at what the needs were in terms of adaptation funding, the expectation was that that was going to be doubled here in Baku. Now, we are almost nowhere even close to a specific figure on adaptation. The NCQG, which is a new collective quantitative goal, actually acknowledges that the needs of adaptation moving forward, which is somewhere around 250 billion US dollars per year, but there is no specific pledge in terms of the amount. Isn't that a disappointment for developing countries? In part because they need to adapt to the effects of climate change. There's so many reports talking about the gap. That's point number two. Point number three, if you look at where we were last year when the loss and damage fund was created, the thinking was that from the 700 billion or million rather that were pledged in Dubai, that we're going to make progress here. If you look at the final outcome document, you don't seem to have a sense that there is at least progress in that direction. Now, there are a few more things that you can talk about with respect to fossil fuel that featured in the final cover document that came out last year. This year, it looks like it's even been diluted. As a matter of fact, we're not even seeing progress in that particular direction. Now, you can talk about issues about just transition, gender, inclusion, where some civil society organizations are saying they don't like the language around inclusion, around gender. So, in large parts, Baku has been a very challenging COP, and you sort of have to argue that, perhaps, it's sort of a process where you're saying you make 3 steps forward, then you make 5 steps behind. And that's the feeling sort of that you get coming out of Baku. Well, again, it's a very disappointing amount, but that's not me saying it. I'd like to say it's most of the parties who are involved in this conference. That's what they're saying. The African group of negotiators said it's a slap, it's not acceptable. NGOs have said it's a slap in the face. And again, the reason is because if you look at that amount vis-a-vis what's expected to be able to take care of paying climate bills, whether adaptation, loss and damage, or maybe transitioning to renewable energies, it's not a significant amount of money, right? However, again, when you talk about the COP, the UN process, the multilateralism process, you have to put everything in context and say that at least it is some progress based out of where we were in Copenhagen, where it was 100 billion, of course, an arbitrary figure, but it took a long time to actually put that money on the table. So even this commitment, for as much as people might say small, big, not a significant amount, it's going to take a while for the wealthy countries to put this money on the table. It's one thing to say it, have it on paper and sign up for it. It's another for this money to be put on the table. No, it is important because renewable energy investment this year hit the highest level where we saw close to 2 trillion investment in renewable energy. This is the first time that we've seen that kind of level of investment. It is a good sign. It's a sign of hope for me. And what that tells me particularly is that the world is in the right direction in terms of transitioning from coal, gas, and oil into renewables. And if that trajectory continues, we could be headed in the right direction. Remember that this is a science-driven process that's saying that there's emission of greenhouse gases, there's emission of carbon, there's emission of methane. And to the extent that you are now changing the energy system to something that goes in the green direction, it's a good thing. So if you are analyzing Baku or COP29, think within the overall global investment on renewable energies. So that's a good sign for me. But there are a few more things, because I know that we came into this COP saying there was an outcome of an election in the United States that was not favorable to this kind of system. But the Britain is stepping up with respect to its leadership on climate. Brazil is also stepping up. That's good leadership. And I have to say that China is also stepping up, because for the first time we heard China say they had invested voluntarily 177 billion in climate. Those are also other streams that we've been asking for. So to me, those are positive signs. But also, if you just look at the voices of the global south, how articulate they are, how they're asking for justice, those are all little things that adds up in terms of where we are with respect to climate. Well, the feeling here is that the vibes in Dubai were a lot, better. Put it that way. It was a little bit, the feeling in Dubai was that, of course, the first day they actually put in place the loss and damage fund, so created a good atmosphere for the negotiators, and they ended up having something about the fact that you have to face down fossil fuels, which is something that we've never seen. So to a very large extent, yes, of course, it was not such for people who scrutinize this in very significant ways. They would have said, well, again, it wasn't such a, but at least compared to Baku, you have to say that there's just a feeling here, even from day one, that this COP was going to struggle. Not only the elections from the United States looming over the overall process, but just the fact that even the presidency on day one said that oil and gas was a blessing to the country. It wasn't a good sign. If you have 1,700 lobbyists in the corridors trying to shape the decision, it's not a good sign. If you have friends, because of other relationship between friends, this country and Albania not coming back, Argentina pulling its delegates out, those were signs that this COP was going to struggle overall. Well, it only means that the parties have to work harder, because again, a lot of the agenda is going to be moved to Brazil, probably the mid-year COP, which was in Bonn, and then in Brazil. So the delegates have to work a lot harder to be able to ensure that whatever is not accomplished here, whether it's on the finance side of things, whether it's on the different work streams, adaptation, loss and damage, mitigation, just transition, gender, all of those things are going to be moved to Brazil. And we sure hope that the global community is going to step up and ensure that this process is put back on track, because the world needs it, by the way. For as optimistic as I am, that's where I have issues. The science says we need to do so many things for us to be able to keep global temperatures at 1.5 degrees. Remember that this is a science-driven process. The science is saying that if you do not commit to ambitious NDCs, what they've called third generation NDCs, which are very ambitious goals in all sectors, then the likelihood is that you're going to go get temperatures above 1.5 degrees. And that's where my worry is. So if you look at this funding that's coming out of Dubai, it's nothing compared to what's required for us to invest in the NDCs in ways that we can keep global temperatures at 1.5. So my only worry is at that level, that the global community may not be seeing the urgency for us to be able to take action in a way that we can keep global temperatures at 1.5. But last point here, and I think it's important, which is that the developing countries who suffer the most as a result of climate change with this outcome ought to make a decision between pursuing arguments of justice where they don't get the money that they require, or maybe doing a proper job of collecting taxes internally and addressing the challenges of climate change. Because whether it's in Nigeria, whether it's in Cameroon, Kenya, South Africa, or anywhere else, you cannot wait for the international community to come and solve the flooding or the lack of crops or maybe the droughts. You have to do it. And that's actually what most countries have to recognize, that this system is very flawed. It doesn't give the results that are expected, and you find solutions internally to be able to get this solved. No, absolutely. And I think that's where the argument starts to resonate to many, because the reality is that states are now using their budgets that were normally would be allocated to schools, to hospitals, to roads, to take care of climate for a thing that they did not cost. And that's where the justice dimension comes in, where they're saying the global north has to pay for it. I get that. But the point here is that the global north and this funding, whether bilateral or multilateral, has historically been very, very unreliable. They commit, they say they will do it, but they don't do it. And so the question here is, if you are a legislator, you're a municipal council official, or you're a government official at the federal level, do you wait for this money to come from abroad and just let your people die? No, you have to find solutions. And here's where it becomes tricky. Actually, economists have established that if you collect taxes and use it properly, you can raise a lot of money. The bottom line is the governance. where money is not used correctly. And that's why you'd hear some of the global north parties ask, you're asking for trillions, you've not been able to use millions correctly. So how do you want us to add trillions when you cannot properly use the millions? Well, again, there are two ways in which you can look at this. If you are somebody who believes in a multilateral system, then naturally you're somebody who believes in incrementalism, which is change that takes time. But if you don't believe in it, you're somebody who believes in transformative change. Then you want a complete disruption of the system. You have to pick. And for the most part, the multilateral system is an incremental system. If you ask me, having observed the system for the last 19 years since my first COP was back in Montreal in 2005, what I'm going to say is that it is a slow process that at least has given us a platform to discuss about keeping global temperatures at 1.5 degrees. Without that, we will never even be talking about that. Without this particular process, you'll never be able to have all these parties come together and get even the oil, gas, and coal industry to start investing in some of green investments, having a corporate social responsibility, and their employers saying, we need you to take action in this direction. So at least for me, the consciousness is growing, but I don't think it is resonating to the extent that you see a whole population in the country electing officials based out of their platforms on climate.